Hi, everybody. Today we have a really special guest. We have Alexander Reeder from Art and Program, a technology studio here in Tokyo. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And how would you describe Art and Program to the uninitiated?
We do such a wide variety of projects. I mean, we do art-based projects like having butterflies on a dress that flap with the wearer's heartbeat, to R&D for companies, to making slippers drive and park themselves.
So would you say it's the intersection of technology and fashion, or the intersection of technology and product design? Does the word design even come into play when you talk about the studio?
I think it's a bit of art, a bit of design, a bit of programming, a bit of hardware design, a bit of software design. So being fluent in each of these fields and being able to combine them, I think, is super important to what we do.
And also, I mean, what's also very interesting, we do similar types of projects. Well, actually, you do more tech, much more tech heavy than what I do. But studios that do touch on all these different disciplines. It used to be that for the physical product, you went to a product designer, and for programming, you went to a programmer. But now, I don't know if you feel it's just a buzzword, but the word design thinking. Do you think that when you heard it being mentioned in the design press or from clients, were you like, oh, thank God people understand what I do now? Or did you think, another buzzword?
I think before design thinking, it was storytelling.
Exactly. Storytelling, right before design thinking, yes.
Right. So I think, of course, it has a buzzword element to it, but I do think that there's truth behind it as well.
What I like about it is that that it is quite medium agnostic. It's all about let's solve the problem first, and then we'll see what form it takes, which is the way I've been approaching design for over 20 years. So for me, it was really a breath of fresh air. But I'm finding that even with all the press about it, people still have no idea what it is that designers or creatives do, even within the industry. So it's interesting. I do have a slight format to these recordings.
Okay.
I like to ask everyone, what were you like as a child?
As a child?
Yes.
I would say introspective, like to be liking to play alone. That sounds horrible, but I mean, I enjoyed having my space and my time and building things and kind of making these worlds and playing within them. Yeah, but I think I was fun and playful as well.
But as a child, what did you imagine you were going to be as an adult or do? Like, did you have an idea of what design is, or was there anything in your childhood, looking back, that you could point to actually inspiring you or getting you on the path to becoming a technologist or a designer, or however it is you are defined now?
I think there are bits and pieces in it, but there's nothing super clear cut. I think, I love to work with my hands in small things. So I love to paint miniatures. I love to paint like rocks or just these small objects, and however I wanted, however I wanted to. But I think it was just like these big worlds are difficult to control. Like you need to have a big space. You need to have a lot of stuff. You need to have money in order to fill a room, which is say like 10 by 10 by 10. But in small spaces, like in a space that you can hold in your hand, you can really like do anything you want in that world. And so I think that I really love that. And so I remember building little robots that would drive around and respond to like whistle sounds. And when I was in elementary school, I remember working with old computers at the same time. I also remember painting and drawing, but I never linked the two. I never drawing and painting and working with hardware were two completely different things at the time. It was only until later that they really came together, that I saw the synergy between them. And so when I'm designing hardware, it's like a very small world, right? You're designing on your computer screen, which is quite large, this piece of hardware, which is 2 or 3 centimeters by a centimeter. I mean, it's 4 layers thick. But I think that's like kind of like the painting part. It's working in this very small world, and yeah. So Now I see the links to what I was
Right.
doing creatively then, but at the time I had no idea.
But did you have a vision of what the future would be like? Did you think this is the world I want to live in when you were a child?
No, actually, no. I love science fiction. I love
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. I love getting in these completely different worlds. When I was, I think, starting in elementary school and junior high school, my dream was to go to. It's more like Elon Musk is like going into the asteroids and mining.
Mm-hmm.
So getting off planet Earth, getting into space, and making this community,
Mm-hmm.
this civilization, which is like in living in space. And then when I got older, I realized that it was going to be really hard to do that in space. I was like, let's do it in the ocean.
Right.
We can all make these communities in the ocean. So that was like my big dream.
That's super, for me to hear that is, because this is the first time we've had this kind of conversation. And that was exactly my vision of my future. I wanted to be an architect focusing on city planning for terraforming
Okay.
on planets
Nice.
and asteroids.
Nice.
That's exactly what I
Cool.
wanted to do. And then when I realized that, like you said, the realization that technology isn't advancing fast enough.
Space is hard.
Yes, I also okay. Let's do it under the ocean, or let's see if we can do it in the clouds, or do it underground. And there's so many. There's such a wonderful period, a few wonderful periods of utopian architecture and city planning in the 18th century. Like London is this wonderful example of utopian city planning. New York City, though it's hard to see it, is also was originally quite a grand and utopian city plan. They started, I think, in the 18th century trying to plan that.
I mean, New York is still fascinating though. I mean, because you have such a concentration of population
Mm-hmm.
and nationalities in this really small area, but it works.
Well, the thing,
It's congealed, I think, in a way which is not really common in other cities in the world.
but that's the thing. A lot of people, when you visit, you might think that that's just how it happened. But the city planners in the 1700s actually started drafting the plan for the not just the grid system of the streets, but also for the watershed and the aqueducts and the reservoir system. They planned it to be a large city. They actually were thinking to the future and saying right now, and at the time, New York was only the third largest city in the colonies, in the 1700s. Boston was larger and Philadelphia was larger. But they planned the future by design. They were like, if we create this 100-year, 200-year plan for access to fresh water, and we level the streets and make it very easy to access the port and the interior, then we will surpass Boston and Philadelphia. So a lot of it is by design. And to me, it's really fascinating by what you can do. That's
that
design.
long-term thinking is super important. I think that's probably one of the biggest missing elements in long forward thinking today.
Yeah, China seems to be the only country doing it on a nation scale.
Right.
America seems to have forgotten it.
Yeah.
Japan was also one of those places that people think is well designed, but Tokyo also it functions in spite of itself in many ways. The way the train lines are not designed to work well together, but they're forced to work well together. The different companies and whatnot.
Right.
So. The questions also I like to ask then, we got a little bit off topic, but as a designer, well actually do you even define yourself? Do you see yourself as a designer or as a technologist? Or as a futurist?
I don't neither. Names I don't like. I don't think there's one term which sufficiently summarizes everything.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Do you like the word creative?
Yeah, creative is
Maker?
perfect.
What's better?
Maker. Creative, creator is fine.
Creator's fine. So as a creator, what motivates you? Like what gets you out of bed every day to do what you do?
Well, because I get to make what I want to make. I get to make stuff for other people, but they've entrusted me to make it for them, so I have control over what I'm making. And I get to design it and build it, so that's plenty.
But what part of that process gives you the most satisfaction? Is it the actual process of making the work, or is it the reaction of the client, or the end user? Is there anything in particular that comes to mind that you feel this is why I do this?
I think there's probably two. One is going into the studio every day and just having like a full day, which is a quiet day, and I can just like sit and work and design and make and create, and it's just like this chunk of time where I can just be in the zone. And I think the second one is when it's done and it's in people's hands or people are using it and I get to see the reaction. The reaction is like the cream on top.
And well, a lot of your work, well, most of your work is experience. Well, one would call experience design, installations and whatnot. Do you generally have a set reaction that you want the end user to have, or is there openness? Do you get clients that say, I want the person to feel this way, or do you get direction from clients that actually have emotional language in it?
Yes and no. I don't think that there's necessarily that thought in mind consciously at first, but I think a lot of our work at Art and Program, or most of the work, is very analog, and I think that's a theme in our work, is how we can make it seem, we're working in the digital, right? But how can we make it seem really natural? How can we make it seem natural to the person who's using it? So in terms of the materials that we use, using real fabrics, using real materials, and how can we get the movement across so people don't see the digital, they just see the interaction, they just see, so with the slippers driving around, you don't see the infrared LEDs which are embedded in front that the camera are tracking, right? Because we can't see them visually, but they're there, right? So what you see left over is just the magical part. So I think that focus on making things feel seamless and analog and natural is integral to our work, and I think that people who come to work with us are looking for that, even if they don't know it.
So another thing that's interesting about meeting people here in Tokyo is your work, a lot of it is done for Japan, but a lot of it is also for a global audience, right? Do you approach those two audiences separately? And do you find that reactions, let's say in New York versus Tokyo, are they different?
I think when it comes to, yes, I think they're very different. I think that what appeals to audiences in different countries is between Japan, between Germany, between China, between the US is all very different, yes.
And have you had any experiences that you could tell us about where you were really surprised about the differences, or even shocked? Like, have you ever had something be totally successful in one geography and it bomb in another, for example?
I think it's very common that happens. I think that a lot of whether it gets picked up or not depends on which media you get it into, and whether or not the media pick it up in the first place depends a lot on whether they think the proper hooks in it that it will get picked up. And so, for example, I think the butterfly dress was a project which is picked up very well in both. I think that Synapseware, which is an environmental sensor, but a very beautifully designed environmental sensor, was very well received in the Western audience, but didn't spread quite as much in the Japanese audience for one reason or another.
And do you think that's because? Do you think it's because the design press is different, is approaching it differently? Like wearable technology is quite a buzzword, like in the U.S. and in the West, but in Japan, it seems to end at the Apple Watch. It doesn't seem to.
I think there's a different idea of what like the ideal gadget is and what gadgets are, and I think that the Western market is trying to move on from that. I think that the interest in wearables is significantly lower than it was a year or two or three ago. So I think that in that sense, and there's also a shift. I think let's move beyond the watch. Let's move beyond the wrist.
Yeah.
That's like already moved forward.
Right.
And I think that in Japan, that's probably not quite at that point yet.
You mentioned Synapseware, and that's one of your latest projects.
That's our first product, completely developed by ourselves. So up to now, all of my work has either been
Client
art
work.
project.
Yeah.
So we do it for not to sell, just for an exhibit, just for fun, or client work, or R&D. But this is completely developed in-house with in-house funds, just for fun. And so
have you tried to pitch it to investors, or
no?
Not, is that part of the plan?
We kickstarted it. We kickstarted it successfully last year. So that was the beginning. But no looking at investors. I don't think that, no.
Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit more about Synapseware? And I see you brought some prototypes with you as well.
Yeah, so this is the device. Synapseware is an environmental sensor, so it can sense a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It can sense CO2, movement, so you could use it for as a step count if you wanted to. Light, it can also detect the difference between RGB, so you can use it to detect colors, temperature, humidity, pressure, so you can do height.
Mm-hmm.
So lots, like environment, like it covers
Right.
a huge spectrum. But we really wanted to make a device which artists could use. So it's kind of it's partially for the DIY movement and partially for artists who want to have not. So Arduino is great, but you have to get a board which is fairly large and then put lots of sensors on it. So you get this package which is quite cumbersome.
Yes.
So we wanted to make something which is as small as we could get it. It had all the sensors in it, including a battery, and Bluetooth, of course, and you could just run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we made. We have 3 ways you can attach it to your body. So we made clothes as well. So I always wanted to make clothes, and that's another story.
Right.
But so we made these pants are Synapseware pants. I always wear purple pants, which is another reason why I made the pants, because I wanted to have purple pants. But there are other colors than purple. But there's a piece of fabric which is sewn into the leg and also on the inside down here that you can attach the device to it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. And now you can walk with it, or you can dance with it, do whatever you want.
Is it like a Velcro type?
Yeah, basically, it's a mechanical fastener.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can also use it. We also make a T-shirt. It will also have a clip, so you can clip it anywhere you want, and we'll not this version, but the next version you'll be able to use it as a pendant, like on a necklace. So now you can use one device, but the idea is if you're an artist and you want it to have like 4, so 1 on each leg and 2 on your arms or something. If you're a VJ and you wanted to control the video art with your arms, you could. So you can connect multiple devices. We also make it so that now it talks to your phone, but you can send data straight from your phone via OSC to your computer, whatever, or talk directly to the computer. So yeah, that's a long version of what it does.
And is your focus to create some kind of new open source platform and see how people use it, or do you have a intention in mind?
So yes, it's completely open source, and yes, I think that
because it's basically an embodied computing kit.
basically, right. So I think that being open source is of course super important. I think that with IoT, a lot of it, we're collecting lots of data, but the data that we're collecting isn't necessarily, you don't necessarily own it. So if you're using a Fitbit, can you get all that data now in a downloadable format?
Right.
What exactly you're tracking. So I think being open source, it's good for privacy, so it's all open, but also you can control the data. So, yes.
And is it as sensitive as a Fitbit, for example, or?
I haven't compared them, so I don't want to say.
Okay. Well,
But the sensor we're using is all the sensors we're using are top of the line. So we made for example, the pressure sensor can detect changes up to 20 centimeters, which is quite good. So if you move it like this distance, you can less than that, you'll be able to detect that. So that makes a wider range that you can use it interactively, which is super important. So
awesome. And what's the price for just the one sensor unit?
I don't know. So Kickstarter was $90 for the unit. I don't know what the price is going to be when it's up for sale, because we're working on the final version of it now.
Right. Well, that's
but
great.
It'll probably be more than $90. So it's not going to be super cheap. But one of the things is that in order for it to get to be super cheap is you need to make 1,000 or 10,000 of them.
Oh yeah.
And that requires lots of capital, which means bringing in investors. My
But
perspective is
you
that
could do another Kickstarter.
you can do another Kickstarter, but I think that I'm not really sure how the device is going to be received and how it's going to be used. So rather than just like going too far in, it's like going maybe in units of 100 and seeing how people use it and seeing how it's received, and then maybe we can make adjustments based on that.
And have you found more interest in the device itself or the actual fashion items as well?
I think there are people who are interested in like one or the other, which is kind of interesting. More like interested in the clothing, because you can also there are patches which you can attach to the clothing as well, so you can use it as a decorative thing. And then people who are really just interested in the device, what has been interesting is there's a fair amount of industry interest in the device. So I've gotten contacted from people in the industry who are interested in including it on their platform,
right?
Or like at a construction site or something.
Was it the production of making the device. Like, I'm assuming you can make this yourself, whereas
Yes.
the fashion you have to have. I can't imagine that you're sewing pants and T-shirts.
Well, I mean, it's the same with the circuit boards. You're sending them to a factory to be made and shipped to you. With the clothing, we have our line set up, so we have factories that we contact and have them made and sent to us. So
Are you doing that in China or in Japan or in
it's
the
all in
US?
Japan.
It's all in Japan?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's awesome. And do you find that adds cost? Is there a trade-off? It seems everyone goes to China.
The only part of which is not made in Japan, and that's the case, and that's because it's much more. It's like just as high quality. I think there's a misperception about China that it's cheap and low quality. I think that's not the case. I think that China is not. This is wrong. I think that, I mean, Apple's having their devices are made in China, and that's not because it's cheap. It's because there's a lot of really high skilled labor.
Exactly.
So the case is better to make in China because it is high quality and it's cost effective. The circuit boards are made in Japan because it's high quality, but it's also because it's much closer and it's much easier. It's very important to have a close working relationship with your factories, and that's a relationship which is super important to the quality of the device. So to us, it's much better to have that partner in a place where we can jump into training and get.
Well, also, a lot of people don't realize when they're manufacturing that the shipping cost really impacts the final price that the consumer has to pay, and without actually figuring that in, and logistics and all that stuff, you end up getting a very expensive proposition going.
Right.
So.
Right.
I ask every guest to bring an object that they find inspiring or that inspired them. So what did you bring for show and tell today?
I brought a ruler, actually. Okay. So it's to scale, so you can when you draw schematics, you can work in different scales, right? So this is actually my grandfather's.
Oh, wow.
And then my dad used it. And then I used it. Not that I use it because I can't do architectural drawings. But I find, so it's wood. It has a weight to it. It has a physical, the physical heftiness to it. And I think it's also very beautifully designed. And I think that the idea of something which is very analog to me. So I think that it's linked to my work today in that sense.
And this reader on the inside, is that something you think your grandfather wrote?
That's something he wrote, yeah.
With a rapidograph or something, right? I wonder how... It's very, very nice. So, in closing, if you were asked by someone that was interested in the type of work you do, what advice would you give them?
Interested how? Interested because they want to follow the same path, or interested because...
Well, if someone says, I love I love the type of installation design you're doing, or experience design, and I want to be an experience designer, or I want to do wearable tech. What advice would you give that person?
Make. Yeah, just make as much as you can and show it to people. I think that's where everything begins. And if you show it to people and you enjoy the experience and you enjoy the feedback and that experience, then you're in the right place.
But when you say make, do you feel it's important for the designer to actually have the experience of physically producing the work? What do you think of people that only do direction, for example?
I think the people who only do direction didn't only do direction from the beginning.
Probably not, yeah.
So start by designing and then make it into something which, when I say make, it doesn't have to be like a final product, but make something which you can show to someone that they can grasp what you're trying to say with your design and give you feedback on it.
Yeah.
That's super important.
Well, I think it's important, when I talk, I'm a professor, so I talk to students a lot, and you do get pitches from people. A lot of people like to tell you what it is they want to do, and there's so many people pitching ideas now. It is important to see and feel and experience. Don't tell me what you can do. Show me what you are doing. Do you feel that it's that type of advice is the best kind of advice to give people?
Yes, and I think that when you do that, you need to be careful about the quality of what you show people. So that's something which I see a common difference between students and in the U.S. and in Japan, for example, is the students at a lot of U.S. universities that I've been to and seen work of are very good at the concept, very good at just making something. But the quality of what they're making to show you, to judge with their design, is not very high. So it ends up getting in the way. So you see that before you see what they're trying to get across with the design. While in Japan, these are stereotypes and generalizations, but which I don't like, but just to go out on a limb, it's more common to see maybe the idea isn't as thought through, but the execution on the object which is being shown is super high quality.
Right.
So you see the beauty in it, and then you look at the idea behind it. So I think in either case, it's super important that the element that you make at the end, its quality, should not get in the way of your design.
Yeah, but that is a problem though for. So a lot of people with good ideas are not necessarily the best designers. So they need to learn how to collaborate with the right people to realize the project.
Exactly. Try it first, and if you're not good at it, find someone who is.
Exactly.
Who is. I think that's a wonderful piece of advice.